Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. Ruth is a visiting professor at a large university in Ireland, and Claire is an associate professor at a primarily undergraduate university in Northern California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And today we're going to talk about inviting contributions. But before we do that, Claire, how was your week?
My week was good. This week I went to the chemistry building on campus for the first time since June, which was really exciting.
Science A. Yeah.
I know, Science A. I've been on sabbatical and out of town, and then got back to town and have some ongoing research collaborations that I was chatting with a colleague with, and it was just really neat to be back in the building and see people. I ran into a couple other faculty members and a couple students, and just being in the same place that I haven't been in a long time. It reminded me that I really like this department, and I like this group, and I like this place, and I'm still definitely on sabbatical and not planning to go back all the time, but it was nice to have a little preview of going back, so that's good.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just going to tell our listeners that for whatever reason, the building that we were both in Humboldt, it's just universally hated, and everybody talks about how it's the actual worst. But both of us absolutely love it. I love that building so much, and I'm so affectionate to it. And I do know the problems that there is, but there's just there's so many things to me that are. Yeah, I just absolutely, from the minute I went in for the interview, I was like, I love this place. So it is kind of funny because I go along with the conversations where everyone's like, doesn't this suck? And you're like, it does. But secretly, I'm like, no, I love it so much. So don't change anything.
know. So, it's just got old science building charm, I feel like.
So much. And I think I've told you before on here that I'm obsessed with chalkboards. I really like chalkboards. And I just love it so much. So, yeah.
So, how was your week?
My week was really good. I think I've told you this before. I had some stitches. I had a minor procedure. And so I haven't been able to go swimming. And the other day I ended up, I just drove down there, and there's a little coffee hut thing, and I got a cup of tea and I just sat, and it was really cold, but I had a big coat on, and I drank my tea, and I smelled the sea, and I was like, oh, this is good too. This is great, because I've been
good.
Well, I can't do anything with the sea because I can't until my leg is better. But then I was like, no, actually I could just go and engage with it. And it sounds stupid because it feels like it's not virtuous enough because you're not exercising or whatever, but it was no, it actually was just fine to do. It was still really
pleasant
and there's so much
emotionally rejuvenating.
Totally. There's so much more to things. And then I was going to tell you another thing, just a side thing. I just realized I have an event in work tomorrow that's on a Saturday, and it makes me so nervous and so much more stressed to do things that are out of normal hours. Do you know what I mean? And I was remembering when I started teaching, once or twice I had a final that was at 7 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And then I would had another time I had a final that was at 7 p.m. And both of those, I've never been so stressed. Because it's I'm not planning on not showing up or being late, but it's so different when you can't just say to someone, oh my God, I'm 10 minutes late, can you? And that's never happened to me, but I like knowing there's other people. So I just realized that today. I was because I was so stressed, and then I was this is a familiar stress, but why? So I recognized that's what it was.
So it's if it's during your normal working hours, then you're scheduled and you're going to be there and you're not worried about forgetting something or being late. But if it's outside them and you're going just specifically for that thing, that's when it becomes...
It's that, and I think it's the fact that everyone else isn't there. Do you know what I mean? Because you could imagine a situation where you're as has happened to me, where I've printed an exam with missing questions or something, and you have to text someone and be oh my God, get the... whatever it is, there's a support
There's
structure.
No one there.
Yeah. And then it feels when you're out of hours, it's no, you really are. If you mess it up or that's
a good point. Yeah. I see what you mean.
So there's that.
If you forget your key, there's no one there to let you in.
Exactly. So
that's a good point.
So hopefully I'm going to report back that it was all fine and there was no problems.
I'm sure that it will.
So I have a quote this week.
What's your quote?
So I think I'm completely obsessed with this woman called Caroline O'Donoghue.
Okay.
Who is an Irish author, and she has a podcast called Sentimental Garbage, which is, it's like, I think the subtitle might be Justice for Dumb Women, but it's all about the things that kind of people are into and then feel a little bit bad about being into. Do you know what I mean?
Okay,
so like,
interesting.
Maybe like, there's an awful term which I really don't like, which is chick lit, which is kind of, you know, books that are written like kind of dismissed as being like lady fiction or whatever, but they can be so good. And, you know, like, so those kind of things. So she has like, she interviewed someone about liking Interview with a Vampire and all of these things that are like really great. But anyway, she also writes books, and I've just finished her first book, and it's a young adult. It was borderline. Like, there was moments where I was like, this might actually be too scary for me. But it's so good. I just love it so much. And it's like set in Ireland, and it's all about the tarot cards. And anyway, I was super into it. So I have a quote from her, which is, I was afraid, really, of being the main character in my own life. I chose to be someone that things happened to because it was easier than being someone who made things happen. And so that is one of her quotes from her book. But I'm into that quote because I think I often feel like that's where it's just easier to go along sometimes and not see yourself as having agency and making things happen. But I also am just really obsessed with her, and I want to direct people towards her books and her podcast because they're very good. Yes.
I love that. Thinking about from the lens of writing fiction, it seems like we often talk about in you know, the fiction writing world, people talk about making sure that your main character has agency and goes and takes action and does protagonist things. And that's what readers usually want to read about. You know, maybe at the beginning some things happen to them, but at some point they have to take charge and start doing things. And so it's really interesting to think about, if that's what we want to read, maybe that's because that's also how we want to be. And anyway, yeah, you do need to take charge of your life to make it be the way you want it to be. But that's hard. And so I know that's really cool.
If you did read a novel where it was just like, okay, come on, man, when are you going to step up? And then you're like, oh, maybe you need to have that chat with yourself. But so we're putting it off because we don't even know how to talk about what this episode is about. No, I'm kidding, but kind of.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yeah, so this episode, so this is kind of a behind the scenes, how do we come up with episodes? And usually what happens is something along the lines of one of us will have an idea that we're thinking about, and we kind of kick it around with each other trying to figure out, well, what's the meaning behind this idea, or what's the big takeaway, or what's the umbrella behind this thing that we're talking about. And this week I felt like we had a lot of ideas that really definitely felt like they were under the same umbrella, but we couldn't really figure out what the umbrella term was. So maybe by the end of the episode we will have but something to do with inviting contributions from people and being helping them contribute to the best of their abilities and feel empowered to contribute, and thinking about that both from the perspective of how we can do that better ourselves, but also when we've been in situations when people have been excellent about that and we've been really struck by how they do it. What else do you have to add, Ruth?
Yeah, and I was thinking it would be funny, we should never, ever, ever do this. But the way that me and Claire communicate is, like, we can't talk on the phone because obviously time-wise that doesn't really work out. So we do a lot of voice memos back and forth to each other, WhatsApp ones, and it's like one of my it's my favorite thing because kind of as like a single mum, it's very hard. Like, it's not likely that I'm ever going to have like 30 minutes of an evening to just sit down and chat. But often our conversations do add up to 30 minutes just through all of these voice memos going back and forth. Oh, yeah,
that's probably true.
Yeah, so we definitely do a lot of like, this is what I'm thinking. And yes. So I think maybe we could start with, because what's working for us is that both of us have had interactions recently that have felt really positive and... Yes.
Yeah, so maybe what kicked this off was I was thinking about a colleague of mine who just seems to really be calm and working on whatever we're working on, and I never get the impression that he's judging me or anything like that. So he's simultaneously expecting me to do the things that... or he has high expectations and I rise to meet those expectations, but I also never feel like I'm being judged. Like, I don't feel like the consequence of not doing everything perfectly is his judgment. I rather feel like we're working together and the goal is really clear and we're just trying to figure out how to do that. And so I don't know, some maybe more concrete examples that would make it a little more easy to understand is like if we're at sea together and something goes wrong. Like sometimes at sea, somebody forgot something. I feel like there is judgment that goes around like this person messed up. But who really cares about that?
I'm having so much anxiety about all of this at sea because it's like your life. You're not even talking metaphors. Like you actually like this is how high stakes it is. That's so stressful. I'm like complaining about going to work on a Saturday. You're like, no, I'm actually going to go in a boat, and if I forget this thing, like we're really in trouble. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, of course, everyone tries to remember things and bring backups and have plenty of extra of whatever you need. And the ship's crew always brings lots of stuff. And the ship's crew usually says something nice like, if you guys try to be self-sufficient, we can probably cover you whenever something goes wrong. And so anyway, we're all used to solving problems as they come up because something does come up. But the really key thing that I love about this collaborator that I'm talking about is when things go wrong at sea with him, I don't feel any judgment going around. I don't feel any, this shouldn't have happened. Someone should have done something differently. Someone should have thought about this more. I just feel we're all in this together. Let's figure out how to MacGyver this to work.
Oh my God,
we're trying to do new things, you know? I mean, it's kind of an acknowledgement that we're out here doing new stuff. You know, it's research. This particular thing hasn't been done before. And so it's a challenge. And so anyway, I just really appreciate that feeling that he somehow brings with him. And then we're talking about how to solve the problem, and we're all trying to figure it out, and there's not this weird undercurrent of social issues. We can all be excitedly building something together. And so I really admire that about him and have been trying to think about where that comes from, and I'll talk about that in the working on.
Wow, well that's, yeah, like I mean, because I've been having a similar experience with somebody who's kind of like in charge of what I'm doing, and it's weird. It's a weird experience, and it's that thing you're talking about there's genuinely isn't going to be any judgment, and like you're being asked a question with like real curiosity about what you're going to say, not like, well, are you going to get this right, or are you going to get this wrong, like you know that. And it's weird because it's kind of really making me feel braver in situations to actually like
totally
be like, oh, could we try this or that? Because nobody is going to be like, I can't believe you just said that, or like, you know, judging you. I'm having so much anxiety about the thought of being on that ship and being judged. That is like actually my worst nightmare. If you're like, did you bring the life vest? You're like, no, I'm so sorry. Like everyone is showing
No, it's
you.
okay. You remembered the life vest. Don't worry.
But this is a big part.
Oh, but even that was a judgment. It'd be okay if you didn't remember the life vest. We'd figure it out.
Yeah. No, yeah. And
sorry, go ahead.
But yeah, it really, I can't believe how much it is working for me to be in that situation. And I think, I will talk about this more in the working on, but it really has made me think about how I interact with people, because it's so different to not feel like someone has laid out a trap for you. And are you going to fall in the trap, or are you going to get the trap right? And like, yes, it's very different. And it's interesting that you're saying that, because I'm an awful blamer. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really, when something goes wrong, I really like to figure out who's responsible. And I think I've told you this before.
It's like a gossipy thing.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And like, there's so many times when the kids were little that like, and it felt like you were kind of living or dying by whether these kids are going to get sick or not, because you just had so much to do. And so when the kids would get sick, I'm like, who's patient zero? Like, who is the kid who brought this into the daycare? And like, so many times it was us. Do you know
Uncle
what I mean?
Peter.
But like, it was usually like, it was just as likely to be we were patient zero and we were the one who brought it in. But it just, for some reason, it felt like it orders the universe for me to figure out who did something wrong, and it's awful because then I live in fear of being the blamee, right?
Yes.
And so
exactly, that is such a good thing to remember.
Don't bring me on your cruise. I won't bring the life vest, and I'll bring everyone.
No, you'd be great, I'm sure. I love what you're saying about the genuine. It seems like you're really emphasizing the genuineness. If someone's genuinely asking, what do you think? If someone's genuinely curious about your thoughts, then you're more likely to be free to think of some thoughts. And again, I'm going to refer to fiction writing and how there's like people talk about this inner editor. Now that can be good, Your inner editor is like, oh, I think you should do this differently. But then there's this inner judgment thing, and that's not good. You need to be free to write down 25 ideas without judgment to find the 26th that was like actually really good, But if you're judging idea 4 and you're like, that's stupid, idiot, then you're never going to get to this cool idea further down the line. So it's kind of, now we're stepping out to where there's multiple people instead of just two sides of yourself. But the genuinely curious and interested and pursuing ideas without condemning them as stupid.
Yeah, and like, I mean, we've all had the experience with interacting with someone who is blaming you and judging you. I'm like, anyone who's talked to me has had that. No, I'm kidding. But like, it's awful, and it really makes you, I think I've definitely talked about this on here before, but like kids, like when little kids are like really praised for like, oh, that's so brilliant, or that's so smart, or whatever, it makes them less likely to try new things, or, because they really want to hang on to that praise. And it can kind of feel like that, even if you're in a situation with someone who is evaluating you and finds that you are doing the right thing. It still can be stress inducing because you're like,
yes,
I don't know how to hang on to this.
You have to keep doing it. What if you mess it up?
Totally.
If they're approving of you for doing XYZ, you better keep doing XYZ or something might go wrong.
Exactly.
And I also want to emphasize, I meant to emphasize this cool thing you had that then I forgot to emphasize. But you were saying if you yourself are judging other people, then that actually reflects back. Now you have to worry about other people judging you.
Oh, totally.
And so,
totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is getting right to what I'm working on. Because when I was drilling down and trying to think about this character, my colleague, who's, I'm just laughing because I called him a character, like he's in a story. But
you are in the novel of your own life. It's fine. We all are. So, yeah.
I think the key might be that he himself is not worried about who's to blame. He himself is just trying to solve the problem. He's focused on how are we going to do this cool thing that we're trying to do. He's focused on where is the best place to get these iron-limited waters. And so, he'll ask me. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I have the answer. But really, once I think about it, I do have some thoughts that I can contribute. And we can, so he's not even thinking about me, this individual, and whether or not I know something. He's like, oh, maybe Claire knows something that would be helpful. So he's being genuine and curious, like you're saying. And I think it really comes from this, I think his inner peace and his inner comfort is going outward. And so he's not judging people. He's not afraid of judgment. And so that kind of perpetuates outward. And so I think that's kind of, for me, that's my takeaway of this thought, is that to have these great interactions like I've had with this person where I feel inspired and I don't feel judged and I feel like we're in a setting of trying to figure this thing out together, I think the way to get there is to be confident that that's what's happening, to be at peace, to not worry about judgment myself, and then I can help perpetuate that out.
I'm having this thought, and it's sort of like, it's maybe a little adjacent to what you're saying, but I had this really intense sort of epiphany Zen moment like a month and a half ago.
I love it.
Yeah,
what is it?
So my eldest daughter participated in, did I talk about this on here? I don't know. It's a big concert called the Peace Proms, and it's sort of a cross-border initiative where different schools from Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland come together and do this huge performance. And anyway, it was ginormous. I did not understand the undertaking, but we went to the concert and it was in a really big stadium, and every single parent in Dublin, I think, was going to this concert also to see their kids perform. So it was crazy. The traffic was insane, and trying to leave the place. So the kids were exhausted because it was like finished at 11 p.m. at night. And it took, I think, probably 45 minutes to get out of the parking lot. It was crazy. And there was like, but I just kind of had this moment because like, I was just like, everyone is in a car with tired children and they're all just trying to get home. And it was just, I was like, I'm not going to try and muscle in front of people. I'm not going to think the worst of this person who is muscling in front of me. I'm just going to, and it was like, I just completely let go of any like my normal blame and judgment of like, well, this is happening because blah blah blah. Look at this guy, you're trying to get ahead of me, and like all of those things. And I was just like, we're all trying to just do the same thing here, and no one is trying to mess anyone, like, you know, get ahead. Like, and it was just so nice because I was just like, what are you gonna do? Like, this is fine, and it was fine. It was 45 minutes. Everyone was tired and emotional, but I didn't have this like angst about thinking, you know what I mean? And so it just kind of maybe I embodied your character, your main character, like the person you're talking about. Where it was just like we're just all going to figure this out. It's fine. We'll get there in the end. We don't need to be like enemies and like, you know, I don't know. There's something too about, I think what we're both saying, like the opposite of that situation is like almost trying to have a ladder of where you are in comparison to other people. Do you know what I mean? And like, there's something about evaluating. And it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of how I interact with students. And often as like an instructor, I don't know how to say this without sounding like the worst teacher ever, but sometimes you're not genuinely looking for their opinion. Do you know what I mean? You're like, yeah, no, just do what I say. Like, that's what, you know what I mean? And sometimes you're not like, oh, please tell me another way to teach this class or whatever. Like, you're just genuinely like, sure. And you are in that kind of examination role where you're like, I have the correct information. I'm asking you a question, but I'm going to see whether you got the right answer. I'm not genuinely curious about what you're going to say. And so some of that, I think, A, I want to be less like that. And B, I don't want to carry that into my interactions and assume that everybody else is, you know what I mean? Like treating me that way. So I think, sometimes...
Interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's weird because sometimes I genuinely don't necessarily want someone's input. And I have had situations where people give me their input and it annoys me. Do you know what I mean? Right. So I think I have a lot of fear then about doing that to somebody. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, oh, if I'm making a suggestion, am I being that person who annoyed me? You know what I mean? So that, I think...
that makes so much sense.
But I think it comes back to confidence because, like, if I just... And, there, you know, and this happened to me over time with teaching where I got more and more confident. So when a student... Because every now and again there was one student who was like, do you know how you should have explained that? Or do you know what would be really helpful? And you're like,
Yes.
But when you're more confident, you're just kind of like, okay, buddy, sure, thanks, but no thanks. It doesn't bother you. Whereas earlier in my teaching, that felt kind of... Like, a threat is a strong word, but it was a criticism, and it made me feel like... Why are they saying this to me? And blah, blah, blah. So I wonder, like, the guy you're talking about, like, he doesn't seem to get... He's not threatened by someone asking a question or making a suggestion.
No.
Like, yeah.
And he's not threatened by something going wrong in the plan that he had. And so, therefore, I'm not threatened if something goes wrong in the plan I had.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. So, I mean, you're bringing up excellent points. I mean, the student who says, I think you should have taught it this way. I mean, I don't think we're saying that we should be genuinely curious about what everyone has to say about everything all the time, you know? Like in that case, I think maybe, though, if we are asking a student a question, like you're talking about, asking students questions, and are we just assessing them and judging them? And that's a really good point. But maybe we could frame it a little bit differently. Like, maybe I am genuinely curious about what their answer is, not because I'm going to think it's right or pursue it, but because I'm trying to teach them. And so if their answer is something unexpected, I am actually interested. It is going to influence how we go forward. I'm using it not to judge them, but to judge where they're at learning this concept so that we can move forward in our mutual goal of learning this concept.
Oh, that's so
does that help at all?
I love that so much. That's so good.
Oh, good.
Because then you're like, you can be assessing if the answer is correct or not, but you're not attaching a judgment to the person about whether they should be like thrown off the ship or whatever. I'm back on the ship.
Yeah. Because it's like, I mean, I definitely am not saying that we shouldn't be judging whether their answer's right or not, because obviously we're assessing whether they learned the thing. And I definitely am not saying that I always want constructive criticism on how to teach my class, that I spent a lot of time thinking about how to teach. But it is illuminating that somebody felt strongly enough to say something about it, and maybe I can use that. I have so many writing analogies. Like, if somebody's confused about the story at this particular point, it might not mean that the story's wrong at that particular point, but it might mean the way you expressed it didn't come through, and it needs a little tweak, and then it will come through, or something like that. Anyway, isn't it helpful?
Yes. Oh, super helpful. I love that. Like you are assessing people's learning, but it doesn't necessarily mean like you're judging their soul or something. But then also, and I do think there's a difference between solicited and unsolicited input. Do you know what I mean? And
I think so too, for sure.
And there is times when I'm genuinely asking.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes you're like, I want feedback on this. And other times you're just like, look at this cool thing. Or other, like it's not the right time for feedback all the time. Yeah.
Okay. Also, we just need to have an episode where you just try and break down, like, how are you going on a boat? How long are you going on the cruise for?
2 weeks.
Oh my God, that's so stressful.
Yeah, end of May to mid-June, or maybe it's 3 weeks, I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
We need to have just
it'll be fun.
A conversation about it. I can't imagine anything.
That's a great idea, because I do feel like research cruises are such a, I don't know, specific thing that I think that could be fun to just chat about what a research cruise is. And
super fun, because I think every discipline has super random specific things, but they kind of have commonality in their random specific things. Do you know what I mean?
True.
So I think that would be super interesting. Are you bringing a student or anything?
I'm bringing a student.
Oh, good gravy. Okay, yeah, that just gave me a whole extra layer of anxiety. So, yeah.
Oh, no, she'll be great.
Yeah.
Have you done your working on yet?
Yes, well, my working on was just, like, do I really want input? That was my question.
Oh, yes, that's so important. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, and maybe part of it is being clear about this is not the time for input.
Yes.
Or whatever. That's totally appropriate, I think.
Yeah. And then just blame isn't helpful. Like, it feels helpful because it feels like you're straightening out the situation. And once you find the person to blame, then you can just, like, shun that person and then this will never happen again or whatever. And funnily enough, that's not how things have worked out. So maybe blame is just not good.
The way that I think about blame a lot, that I think I shouldn't, and well, I'm trying to get away from saying should, so forget about what I said should. But I think it's not helpful for me to think about blame a way that I often do, which is, in teaching my classes, if something goes wrong or somebody's confused or somebody missed something, I'm always looking to see if there's ways that the blame would fall on me. And as long as it doesn't, I don't care.
Oh,
but
never related
I don't know if that's helpful
to anything anyone has ever said.
Yeah.
And that's because it's like, that's my thing immediately is, and then it's really weird because I can kind of have so much more grace and generosity if I figure out it's not my fault. Do you know what I mean? And
totally.
I wish I could just do that no matter what. And
what about grace and generosity for yourself?
Right. And yeah.
And I mean, the thing is that looking for whether the blame falls on me or not means that I'm looking for blame to fall somewhere, and kind of feeds back into this thing.
And even if the odds always come out that you manage to find someone else to blame, it means you're constantly living with the fear that you won't, and then you're going to be the one to blame.
Exactly. And I think go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I always feel like if I find a situation where I am to blame, then I can't be upset about that situation or have any sympathy for myself. Do you know what I mean? And that's like, I think part of it too, where it's like, well, I can't be sad about this if it's my own fault. And it's like, sure, you can. You can absolutely be sad about something if it's your own fault.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
I that's interesting. I have kind of the opposite reaction, where if I find that I'm to blame for it, it's like a critical disaster, which is obviously not true. So, yeah, my colleague's superpower of just being like, oh, this didn't work as we planned. Let's figure it out, whether or not, like, let's not even think about blame. Yeah. That's what I'm aspiring to. I also wanted to mention that this is our sesquicentennial episode, I think, although that might mean 150 years, but in this case it means 150 episodes. So that's exciting.
I applaud you for being able to say that word, because there's literally no way in the universe I would have said it. So, yeah, wild.
There was one more syllable in it than I expected there to be when I Google searched it this morning. So.
I feel like every time, another behind the scenes, every time we record an episode and I'm writing the file title, I'm like, Claire, how could we have 130 episodes? So anyway, today I'm not going to say it. It would be great if I was able to be like, I can't even make the joke because I can't say the word. But anyway, yes, crazy times.
Crazy. 150. Woot. thanks to all our listeners for listening to all of our cool episodes.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.